Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It's another video. And in today's video, I want to do a brief introduction into different ways that we can progress load to a movement and increase the movement patterns and movement complexities within exercises so that we move a little bit better. So let's get right into it. So there are three main things that I kind of want to touch on before we get in further with the video. Number one is center of mass, center of gravity, and then thirdly, base of support. So center of mass, I like to think about it, is usually the average point in which all masses are evenly distributed within a system. And this is typically going to be the point in which angular velocities are going to spin from. So angular velocity, I like to think about the rate at which something rotates around a pivot point. And then we have our center of gravity. Center of gravity could be the average point in which all net torques or external forces are distributed with the effect of gravity. So if I were to stand here, I know it's not a great example, but if I were to stand here, say my forearm is my lower extremity, my hand is my upper extremity, with the crease right here being my hinge or like my hips. If I were to bend forward like this in a uniform gravitational field where gravity's pulling down vertically like this, my center of gravity is going to shift a little bit more towards my upper body because I'm bent forward a little bit or I'm hinged. And then we have our base of support. Our base of support, if we look at this great stick figure here, we have 2 points of contact right here by the front foot and then here by the back toe or by the front toe and the back foot. And we have two different points of contact with a wide base of support. So we're able to maintain good balance here. So what does this have to do with exercise? So when we exercise, we usually have to overcome some form of external force, whether that is gravity or some other kind of external loading, whether that is a 20-kilogram barbell or a 30-pound dumbbell. Now we can actually progress movement with or against gravity or without gravity, right? Say we can't tolerate getting our arm up doing a bicep curl with the effect of gravity. What we can do is work more with like a horizontal component here, and we can actually add in some form of external resistance, let's say with like a TheraBand or so, to try and build up some more tissue tolerance and tissue capacity so that we can so that over time we can go and do that curl against the force of gravity. Now, obviously, there's nuance to that, but that's just one way that we can think about a possible progression with and without gravity. And this can be done usually with one, two, or multiple different points of contact. When we increase the amount of points of contact that we have with the external surface, we generally have an increased base of support. And then when we shorten up or narrow the amount of narrow our base of support, we typically have less points of contact. So we can actually progress the complexity of a movement or movement pattern by altering our center of mass, by altering the external load placement that we have on our body, and by narrowing or broadening our base of support. So let's consider some examples to this. So one I like to think about is the Turkish get-up. So with the Turkish get-up, typically what occurs is we have multiple different points of contact where we are laying on our back or supine, and we have a relatively broad base of support, and we usually have one arm extended out with an external load over our center of mass. As we progress through this exercise, we start taking away different points of contact, and our base support goes from really wide to more and more narrow. So it's a really great exercise to do that. A pistol squat is a great unilateral exercise, unilateral typically being that one limb is in contact with an external surface. And it's a great way to train the lower extremity in a unilateral fashion. This is great compared to like a bilateral squat. So bilateral squat, typically our base support is a little bit more wide or a little broad. And then when we get to a pistol squat, our base support gets a lot more narrow because of the one point of contact. And this can be going the same thing with a one-arm push-up as well. So when we work on taking away a point of contact, adding load outside of base support, these are different ways of progression. And then once we add a load outside of base support, it becomes a lot more difficult to stabilize and often requires more force or more energy, so to speak, out of the muscle to support the joint. So let's say if I am standing here, my feet are about shoulder width apart here. If I were to hold let's say like a 10-pound dumbbell with my arm outstretched, not only is my center mass going to change because of the external loading, but I'm also going to require more muscle, I guess you could say force and a little bit more energy here to stabilize my shoulder joint with regard to the external loading that goes on outside of my base of support. So it gets much more challenging when we start to add in external loading factors outside of our base of support, and it requires much more coordination and much better balance, so to speak. So with all this being said, there's multiple different ways that we can add complexity to a movement, and alongside that, adding load is also a great and viable option for that. So adding load helps us to not only build muscle, but helps us to increase bone mineral density, get us stronger, and create adaptations. So this is a great option when progressing exercises. So let's say we are to take like a barbell squat, right? Over time, obviously now strength training is non-linear, but we can start to add weight over time. And this is a great way for us to, let's say, create those adaptations that we desire. Because when we are in the gym, we are typically striving to create an adaptation. So this is a great and viable way to do that. And then we can also challenge ourselves by tolerating and expressing force production in different movement patterns, where that is increasing the velocity of a movement, which is saying how fast we perform an exercise, or it's by getting out of different planes of motion. So typically, if like we oftentimes are moving within what we call the sagittal plane. So if I were to take my body and I were to separate into right and left halves, typically what you're going to do is, let's say, like a bicep curl. You're going to do some form of a squat. Now, obviously, there's going to be different movements within that exercise that can be seen in different planes, but a lot of these exercises are performed in a sagittal plane. So, like I said, bicep curl, a squat, a deadlift, right? A lot of these are flexion extension movements. And we want to try and get out of just that one plane of motion. So let's try working more in the frontal plane where we're doing maybe, let's say, like an adduct, like we're working on our adductors with like a Copenhagen plank, or we're working in the transverse plane where we're adding in some rotation. There are different ways that we can express and tolerate different forces to increase our capacity within those different movement planes, and then adding in different variables such as speed and rotation. So this will help us to get out of static postures and develop better dynamic coordination, and it'll help us to it'll help us to develop better postures and all that. We want to be able to move out of different planes of motion. So now the last part here is just to train with variability, right? And it pretty much reinstates what I just said about a minute ago, is just getting out of different planes of motion and then adding in different exercises. So we want to challenge different movement patterns. So we have our base support, center of mass, training outside of our base of support, adding in external loading outside of our center of mass, so that we can work on things like better balance and everything. So obviously there's nuance that comes with this, and there's not always a need for it, but there is definitely more of a need when we are working in sports or just real life in general, when we need to be able to work on our balance and being able to reach for something and pull it back outside of our base of support. Adding in velocity and rotation, great way to tolerate and express different forces outside of just the normal sagittal plane motions, or uh, adding in different variables like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. If you guys want to drop a comment and ask a question, I'll do my best to get back to you. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you guys for watching. So here's King Strong. Thank you.